Caryn Barnes, by the way, is a principal at Langan, and beyond her many qualifications, I'm not going to read it. She's been working with DEP for years, but I will tell you, whenever I have a site remediation issue, I call Caryn. Caryn sits in all my DEP site remediation meetings because she understands all of the stuff where it gets complicated. So thank you, Caryn. Welcome. Oh, I'll just mention as well, there should be QR codes on your sheets. If you scan the QR code, you can see everyone's bios. So I welcome you to do that. Welcome, Caryn.
Well, good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Caryn Barnes from Langan Engineering. I am a principal there, but I've been involved in lots of DEP initiatives and advocacy over the years. I served as a president of the LSRP Association. I've been on numerous stakeholder groups, the most recent of which is the permit stakeholder group, so we're going to hear a lot about that this morning. But overall, I'll have the folks introduce themselves in a second, but we really want to present the perspectives of the DEP, the LSRP, the client, and the legal community with respect to the ever-evolving regulatory changes at DEP. We'll discuss ongoing efforts of the, I still can't say this right, David, Contaminated Site Remediation and Redevelopment Program, the CSRRP program. SRP was so much easier to say, but the CSRRP program. We'll discuss some evolutions, updates, and improvements to the process, including permits, emerging contaminants, updated standards, and the evolving regulatory processes. The focus of our conversation here today, and in general, is just the collaborative working together with the department and the regulated community to improve the process. So that's what our conversation will focus on today as we go through each of these topics. So welcome and good morning. If you would each introduce yourselves and maybe give us a little fun fact about yourself. Caryn, we want to go first?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Caryn Murphy. I'm a principal at Bressler, Amery & Ross, a law firm in Florham Park, New Jersey. I have been there for 26 years. I do a lot of work in the site remediation area, both counseling clients in the manufacturing, energy, and chemical sectors. And I also do a lot of environmental due diligence for M&A work. So that's basically my, area of focus. I guess my fun fact is Caryn and I met each other 22 years ago, maybe, at a site where we were on opposite sides of a ISR case, and we were both heavily pregnant at the time. And so it's fun to not reconnect, we've seen each other over the years, but both of our children now graduated from college this year, but we met when we were, both pregnant, so that's always our fun fact to reminisce together.
It really is a lifetime here. We have seen our kids grow up together.
Excuse me, I'm David Haymes. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Contaminated Site Remediation and Redevelopment at the DEP. I've been there for 34 plus years. I was torn on my fun fact. I could start with I'm a Met and a Jet fan. That usually gets a laugh out of the crowd. Or I could say that when the Waze tells you to take the turnpike to Iceland in the morning, you should listen to Waze and not take Route 1.
All right, good morning. My name is Rayna, Laiosa, and I'm representing SRIN, the Site Remediation Industry Network, as the chair. Been working with SRIN for a very long time and just really proud to be representing industry on the panel today. I guess the fun fact is I was asked to, when I was in high school, to be the first environmental secretary for the environmental committee. It was a great experience, talk about learning about the government and how things operate in a town. And then I eventually became the chair in 2006 of the Environmental Commission. So been involved with the town and the community as well. So I represent both sides, the industry as well as the government. So that's my fun fact.
Well, thank you. Welcome you all here. Well, let's start with remedial action permits. I think when we all started with the LSRP program, nobody really envisioned that the permits were going to be the roadblock that they've become, this hurdle to closing sites. But when it became apparent that permits were becoming backlogged, the DEP, and particularly the LSRP Association and the Site Remediation Industry Network, convened a stakeholder group back in 2018. I can't believe we've been talking about permits since 2018. But the goals of the group were to collectively review, at that time, were to collectively review it, see if we could clarify the instructions, train people on any misunderstandings, and share lessons learned around the common errors and increase the training there. This group has met for over 3 years and continues on this mission. Even with these efforts, the backlog persisted and a broader input was solicited. Perhaps many of you were involved in the Remedial Improvement Initiative, the RPII. I know George and others were there as well. Through that, other things were advanced, and we can talk about that. But more recently, there's been an expedited review form that was rolled out to speed the more straightforward permits through the process. And now there's LSRP certifications, first for soil and most recently the groundwater RAPs. So let's explore how this process is evolving. And I'll start by asking each of you. We can discuss any of the things that I just mentioned, but for you, how is the permit process going, and what are your key pinch points, or what are your most appreciated improvements? Anybody that wants to volunteer to go first? Caryn, you want to go first?
Sure. I would say that especially the soil wraps, for those that are eligible for the expedited review, have been processed pretty quickly, and definitely see an improvement in that area. I would say that the pinch point for me has been cases that are under oversight, whether not necessarily direct oversight, but under an oversight document. Some of the older ISRA cases that are under an ACO from way back when, those, even though they may have a relatively straightforward deed notice that needs to be approved, are not eligible for the expedited review and the certification process. So those are still in the queue and waiting. So that's been a little bit of the pinch point. What we're seeing for some clients is that, you know, what we think are the straightforward type of approvals are still waiting for that review and internal process at DEP. You know, hopefully as we were talking during our prep session, that the certification process allows, you know, the review of those, you know, to be a little bit quicker than has been in the past. But there still is some downtime. And when you're waiting for that review to occur, your client still has to maintain their original remediation funding source. So for some of our clients, that's, you know, that if it's another year or two of carrying a letter of credit or a surety or whatever the case may be, or money just parked in a trust fund, you know, that's the time cost of money. So that's been the issues that we've seen.
Your comments resonate with me. I think the expedited review has been working well, and David, I'm hoping you're going to give us some numbers, and I've already told David this joke to me, but that was with the expedited process. It's the fastest I've ever been rejected for a permit before, which was wonderful. But in all seriousness, I got a quick rejection. There were some questions over historic fill. I provided some information, and it was approved overall in less than a month, soup to nuts. So I appreciated that quick rejection, which worked well. But the intent really is that will clear up the backlog, so some of the things that Caryn is saying. So, David, I'll turn it over to you. You tell me maybe some stats and what's working.
Gosh, now I have to dig through notes to find them. When I looked this morning, I want to say there was about 45 or 46 soil applications that had come in. Of those, 38 had been approved, I believe. About 5 of the others were waiting on some issues with financial assurance. Most of those have been able to get ironed out quickly enough. And I'm going to correct Caryn. There's been only one rejection of an expedited permit.
It was a request for additional information. Yes.
It was a request for additional information. And again, we're trying to stay on top of those, that when we ask for that information, we make sure there's follow-up. And again, we want to push these things through. We are averaging under 30 days for getting expedited permits out and issued. So, I do think it's been successful in that regard. We did post the groundwater certification last week. Within 24 hours, we had our first submittal. We are up to 5 or 6 when I looked this morning for those. And again, we're looking whatever can come in, get them in. We'll get those approved as quickly as we can and move through. To Caryn's point about the ISRA ACOs, we're not looking. There are certain issues that are where we will be restrictive. If there are areas where you feel we can add to what's allowed under that certification process, please write to us and let us know, and we can have that conversation. We won't do it individually. We would look at it broadly as a group. So again, ISRA cases with ACOs. But please let us know what's out there that you think can be added in, and we will absolutely give that a look. No promise we'll do it, but at least we'll have the conversation and hopefully we'll be able to do it.
David, do you have a sense of if people that have previously submitted an expedited form or even the regular permit process are pulling those and using the certification process, or most of them brand new submittals? Do you have a sense?
It's not exactly 50-50, but it's about 50-50.
Okay.
So really about the expedited permits, that came out last year. I think the one, David, that we were talking about, the one that you're getting a lot of is the historic fill permits for the soil, and that seems to be working. I did have a chance to review the other priorities, and they look to be more like limiting to it, especially the soil for deed notice only. And I think there's some challenges with that because most of the time you do need an engineering control to address the migration to groundwater. And so I think that first one we were thinking it was going to be very helpful because a lot of people would do deed notices, but looking back and speaking to our members, it doesn't always necessarily mean you're going to just put a deed notice because you're addressing that migration to groundwater. So that's one of the, you asked us about like what are the issues and what is hindering certain permits that we're not able to do, and I think that's one of the areas that we can look at. And some of them, especially the last one, which is the groundwater, which is on-site only and no receptors. I think that might be a good for a site that has large, that you're just having one piece of your property. However, I think when you have sites in urban areas, it's going to be difficult to do that because you're so tight in the areas, and you might have commingled plumes, which automatically disregards, disqualifies you to an opportunity for the expedited. But we do like that there is one for historic fill, because industry has been pushing for that, and to have some flexibility. So we thank you for that. We just need to, I think one of the things that, the last month we've been talking about this, we need to really communicate it to our members and really get the message out. And it helps to get the numbers, how many have been approved, and any issues that they've been addressed, and let us know so that we can communicate to our members and as well as the other organizations that we belong to. I think that would be very beneficial.
I'll jump in here. I know it's a potential worry of LSRPs, and I'll ask your guys' opinion on this as well, but with the certification, I'm signing this saying I believe this is true and accurate and it's worthy of a permit, but we've heard that the permits will be reviewed more in detail at the biennial certification, and the work group has confirmed that's what they're going to do. They're going to look heavier into it. So as Ray and others said this morning, we're looking for certainty. There's still a little bit of uncertainty that I've signed my permit, I've gotten this expedited permit, in 2 years there's going to be a review, and maybe we would run into the level of detail, maybe some concerns at the 2-year mark when you're already that far down the road. I don't know that we can make that fear go away, but some thoughts about the uncertainty associated with the 2-year review. David, I'll give it to you first.
So many years ago, one of my favorite DAGs, Rick Engel, told me whenever I'm on one of these talking circuits, I should let people know, for better or worse, there's no such thing as finality, and there's no such thing as certainty. So that's my attorney speaking. Again, one of the issues we had with the permits was the level of review that was getting done on them. And we've had conversations with the Bureau doing those reviews, and we've let them know, again, we need to lift that level of review that's getting done. It has to go more like they're doing now with the RIs and RAs that come in, going through the Bureau of Inspection Review. Give it a higher level review.
And we appreciate that. Thank you.
And it's the two-edged sword here will be, for the LSRPs, we're going to rely on that expertise, we're going to rely on that professionalism, but in the same vein, we're relying on that expertise and we're relying on those expert opinions and that professionalism. If something does go sideways, we're going to be looking at the LSRPs. We're not saying it will, we're not saying it has, but again, that's part of that is just re-educating the staff. That's the whole intent of the LSRP program.
And I do think the LSRPs welcome that. That's how we envisioned the LSRP program, that we would be the experts and be able to get things over the finish line. But you're right, we can't eliminate all the uncertainty.
Yeah.
Rayna or Caryn, from a client perspective?
I was going to say that unlike, when you submit an RAO, there's always the, a little bit of uncertainty in terms of being subject to a random audit for your RAO. But that's a little bit different than submitting a permit under a certification and then the level of review that could come up during a biennial cert. So I think until people go through that first round of their biennial certs and see what that level of review looks like, maybe they'll get more comfortable after that, but nobody really knows yet how intense or not that level of review is going to be on the biennial cert. So that's what's causing a little bit of an angst, I think, in, is the permit final? Are we going to have questions? Are there going to be changes to parameters or sampling frequencies after it goes through the first biennial cert review? So
How final is the final?
right, exactly. Yeah, different than just, being subject to a random audit, which is always a risk that's out there, but.
True.
Well, I guess the issue is if you do the certification and you get the permit and you do the biennial cert 2 years ago, the question is, my understanding, and we've been in meetings, the remedial action report is the final answer, putting everything on the table, what you did, how you did it, how do you arrive to the conclusion of your remediation, and is it protective? And so when you put that all on the table and you put the remedial action permits and you get it, the question is, I guess, 2 years from later, if you do the biennial cert and you start questioning things in the RA, and then you go all back even further to the RI, that's where there may be some disconnect from the RI and RA. And going
Throw in
back
a little
to the
ego
policy that
sometimes, too.
well, going back to the policy that the department put together, there was some flexibility in doing your delineation at that time, at the RI. And at that time, we had information to say, this is where our plumes are, this is where we have, and we will get it in the RA phase. And that document was submitted and complete. LSRP signed off, RP signed off. Years later, the RA is done, you get the permits, and you have more information at this point than when you had before. So it's just more of understanding what was done before and what's going forward and looking at the final answer, and maybe not so much in all the details about that detailed review that you were talking about, Caryn. Coming down the road, is someone going to come back to me, well, 10 years ago you had a point here and you were over, but you didn't address it. So it's that kind of stuff, and I guess what I'm looking for is about the protectiveness. And did you get everything? And at the end of the day, are you leaving up to that mission, protecting the environment and public health? And not get so hung up on all the great details when there was some flexibility in that policy. And it's really the RA that I feel that you really need to get it done. And that's how I've always explained to my members and my peers, that's the final answer.
I'll share
Any
as part
response,
of
Dave, from that?
Okay. Again, and I've said this, since I became the AC. One of my pet peeves is when we review RIs. I, to a large degree, agree with this room. Probably the sooner we get the RI looked at, the better. We should not be looking at the RI at the same time as the RA. We've had it for however long. Why haven't we gotten to it? Again, the report should be complete when we receive it, but if we are going to have issues, it's better if we tell you that at the beginning of the cycle rather than at the end of the cycle. I do recognize that as a problem.
Thank you.
In terms of, I did lose track of some of what you said in there. The part of the problem we have is we ran into a situation where when we started looking at some of these and we had notes in our database, the infamous NGEM system, that, as part of the RA review, there was, quote unquote, a promise made as part of the RI that they would get this other stuff done in the RA, and there were situations where we were not seeing that information in there. And then that started part of a cycle of, well, okay, if person number one didn't have it in there, how do I know that person number two is going to have it in there? We need to back out from that. Just give that one issue a look, see if it's there in the RA. Delineation does need to be complete. I do believe that I have to get this right, the means still need to justify the ends. I understand that Sarah is all about protectiveness. but you still have to make sure the I's are dotted to be able to truly demonstrate that protectiveness has been achieved. You can have a remedy that's 100% effective and 100% protective, but really doesn't do anything for the environment. And I want to try to avoid those situations.
I'll share just a little insight from the working group with the permit group here. We have very interesting discussions as the groundwater permit, the certification was coming out. I shared my experience. I was trying to get a natural attenuation program, but my concentration was just deemed by the department as too high, which seemed a little bit subjective. We had proven all the other lines of evidence for natural attenuation. I'll share it. It was TBA, it was 200,000. It's a high number, but there's nothing in a guidance or regulation that says what's too high. The department had been using some rules of thumb and some internal conversations about when that would be okay. In my instance, before the permit came out, we were asked to do some more remediation. So $1 million remediation later, my TBA is a much more manageable number in the single thousands instead of the 100,000s. And I think about this permit now that allows us to get natural attenuation. There is nothing in that checklist that says how high is it? Is it too high? And that subjectivity comes up. So we talk with Mary Ann and the others in the group that, you know, if I'm okay signing that and we come up with a 2-year review and the M&A lines of evidence continue to be okay, then that should be acceptable. So there's definitely going to be some changes to internal policy and comments and things like that. But I go back to what David said. It's going to be on the responsibility of the LSRP to show that what we think is happening, and we're documenting it in the right way. So 2 years later, if I'm still not decreasing, then yeah, we probably will have to implement that remedy anyway. But it's interesting from a policy perspective there. And the department's open to these conversations and want to make sure that things are being implemented consistently, whether you're getting a signed off permit or you're getting one from the DEP.
So Caryn, just an additional to the certification. From our perspective, Dave, I really want to thank you for listening and hearing us on the remedial action permits, and to have a checklist of answering questions and receiving it and giving us the permit. I mean, we've been talking about this for several years, and I just want to recognize you and your people to really listening and hearing us on that. And I think at this point, we need the regulated community to really look at those forms for the certification and see how we can take that. If there's permits that's been sitting there for 2 years, you're tied up on your financial assurance. These forms do have the flexibility. You can use variances. Just please document and explain why. So I think there's an education piece on our part, as well as the department, to really communicate and push and give us the examples where those certifications that people have used variances and they explained it and you gave them the permit. So some of those questions are kind of linked on the forms, the soil and the groundwater. And if we could have examples like these were successful, you can get a permit, or you know what, this was not successful, because we need to all learn from each other, because it's, and I always say, it's always the three of us, the LSRP, DEP, and industry working together. And I think this panel here with this topic, it's just the beginning, and we need to have the dialogue. And we are working together for a long time on the remedial action permits. But I think we're moving, and we're slowly moving.
Rayna,
Thank
are you aware that there is an NOI checklist coming out? Have you seen it? No? We're working on that in our stakeholder group, which has been very interesting.
Dave, I think Mike said something that they were working on, some instructions for the soil in the groundwater certification.
Yeah, so we're working on a frequently asked questions for the permits, but also the department is, at least we're having discussions about a checklist that they use internally for what they approve and what they don't, and which would help guide us to submit a more complete permit. So looking forward to that. David, anything else coming out from the RPII process? We've implemented a lot through just the permit review. Are you seeing some of the tech consults or other things that were talked about through RPII?
So we had formulated 3 working groups. One was for training. The training is moving forward, I believe. Please don't ask me what the trainings are, because it's not going to come out of me. But they are looking at getting those trainings going. I believe it's been handed over to the training committee. They're working with LSRPs as part of the people who will also give the training. Won't just be the DEP doing it. and I think they're looking at getting those out sometime this fall. The inspection review issue, again, what do we look at? How deeply do we look? When do we look? We're still moving forward with that. We're looking at getting some of those additional flow charts out. We already did that for the permits. We're hoping to get those flow charts out within a month or so. We were hoping for today or by today, but it did not happen. I think next Tuesday is the CVP SHRAG meeting. That's our next hope for. I've kind of given up hope. The third one is the technical review panel that we put out there. Again, that's when an NOI, a notice of incomplete, gets issued. You have up to 60 days to respond to the NOI and explain where that information may already be in-house for us, what we may be missing, or better interpretation of how we're looking at things. As part of that, we have the technical review panel, and again, that would be coming into the department. It's a request to meet with technical subject matter experts on that technical issue. It would be somebody who has not already been involved in any way, shape, or form with that review. That came out a couple of months ago already, and so far we've only had one technical review panel request that came in.
And that's different from the tech consults that we have.
Technical consult is on the front end. If you're getting ready to send something in and you want to, it's kind of moved off its original path, I think, for what the technical consult was supposed to be. But again, if you have an idea, you'd like to go in a certain direction and you want to make sure the department's going to buy into it, you would come in beforehand and meet with the department, as opposed to the technical review panel, again, is afterwards when we've already done our review and we have an issue with what you've submitted. You can have this TRP meeting and see if that gets you out from under the notice of incomplete.
Well, you didn't have that to roll out for us today, but maybe you folks saw yesterday the remedial action permit fees were updated.
Yep.
Yep.
So
the annual
were the
review
other,
list.
all the fees were updated yesterday. They go into effect on July 1. There's
actually a bunch of decreases. I was surprised to see. That's good.
The pre-RAO fees, I think, went up a little bit. They went up starting at the base fees went up, I think, $25. The media fee also went up either 25 or 35. The permit fees, they fluctuate as they do every year. Maybe I shouldn't give away our secret on this one. The killer on the permit fees is it's all based off your hour average salary as an hourly rate, and we round off to the nearest 5. So if it's 107.50, it goes back down to 105. If it's 107.51, the hourly rate goes up to 110. So that's a chunk of the fluctuation, because that then gets multiplied.
Does it follow the rounding rule that was promulgated in the groundwater quality standard?
I have not involved Barry Frasco in any of these calculations.
We all love the rounding rule.
So, but again, the hourly rate usually goes, it's either 105 or 110. I think one year we were top heavy. All those folks have since retired. It may have been 115, but it's usually been 105 or 110. The hardest fee to calculate is the active groundwater, because we get one of those a year, and they do take a while to make sure that you are truly capturing your plume and all of that. What we almost always do with that one is we just go back to the M&A fee instead, and because otherwise the active fee would be exorbitant. I'll leave it at that. But again, those are going up. Next year, or if and whenever the rule goes out, there's going to be a big update on how we do the fees. The calculation will be the same, but we're looking at a single permit rather than multiple permits with multiple fees, things like that. If you have a soil permit and a groundwater permit now, you would just get a single permit with a section on soil, a section on groundwater.
Little teaser there.
That's what we're looking at.
All right, I'm ready to wrap up the remedial action permits, unless you guys have some closing thoughts on that. We good? That one's there. I'm going to move on to PFAS. So let's switch gears. Initially, emerging contaminants were put out to the regulated community by a web page. I've always been interested in that. It wasn't a policy. It was just, hey, here's our emerging contaminants website, with the requirement to evaluate for the potential of PFAS. It was not to sample. It was to evaluate, and that was on the LSRP to decide that, with documenting the PFAS evaluation or investigation in the next milestone document. We started with groundwater quality criteria, which was a little weird for how we normally do things. We usually start with soil, investigate the soil, and go to groundwater, but we started with groundwater. The soil numbers, at least a handful, are still out, or have come out since then. And it's presented some challenges along the way, maybe because the limits are so low because of the pervasiveness of the PFAS out there. But now we have a handful of these standards and a requirement to sample for a full suite of compounds. And surface water is still coming, right? We keep hearing surface water is still coming. All right, but with the recognition that PFAS regulations are evolving and that I'm sorry, can't even read my homework. And the need for a collaboration to get our sites together. The LSRP, again, reached out to the DEP, and we have a collaborative, I won't call it a stakeholder group, it's a conversation room where we share what we're doing as far as investigation, what we're finding in background, commingled plumes and things like that. And then what the DEP is doing. We've heard some about the statewide sampling investigation that's going out and hopefully see some results from them. So this group has met since the beginning of 2023, and we're discussing the things that we're seeing. But in many instances, the LSRPs are still in the process of conducting our PAs or our SIs. We don't have delineation yet. We haven't gotten to the remedial action yet. And consequently, the DEP hasn't reviewed any remedial actions other than the work that they're doing. So I think that this exchange of information in our stakeholders is very good, that we're both learning from both sides. But when we factor in the evolving EPA standards, the regional PFAS impacts that we're dealing with, and the very, very, very low concentrations we're being regulated to, couple that with the non-degrading characteristics of many of the PFAS, what do you see or what are you encountering as the most significant challenges with this PFAS investigation? And Rayna, I know you're ready to go, so I'm going to start with you.
Okay. I think first things first, and what is parts per trillion? I mean, we're so used to parts per billion. We've been doing that for years. And so parts per trillion, and this is from Michigan, it's 1 PPT is equivalent to a single drop of water into 20 Olympic pools. So 20 Olympic pools is like 600,000 gallons. So just imagine you have 20 Olympic pools and you're just putting 1 drop. And just trying to imagine that and picture that, it's quite amazing. And then we're regulated. New Jersey has been on the forefront with PFAS, without a doubt. PFNA coming out first, and then PFOA and PFOS with the MCLs and the groundwater standards, 13 and 14. So a lot of the water companies and the industrial facilities are working through that process. But just looking at parts per trillion and trying to understand the magnitude of that, and just understanding that we are able to detect to that level. And it's quite amazing with the equipment.
Advances of science and technology.
The science there, but also the biggest challenge is what method are you going to use and what PFAS contaminants are you looking for? And, you know, as you said, we have a handful of standards, which is more than what other states have done. But you know, we're just trying to work through the process. And I think today's panel is a really good discussion because it's a combination of all three, and we're having a dialogue. And this is a first because the department has been a little uncomfortable talking about emerging contaminants in a public forum. And it's really nice to have the opportunity to speak on behalf of industry, and it's just a dialogue, because I think we can all learn from each other, especially in this audience. Everyone is dealing with some type of PFAS in some degree. And I think if we just share that knowledge and we work together, I think we can find some solutions. So I think that's really the big challenge. And it's complex. It's not easy.
Caryn, you want to talk about some of the things you and your clients are struggling with PFAS?
Sure. I think even if you're not directly representing a client or a company that generated or used or handled PFAS,
It's
or
manufactured,
emerging
stored, used,
contaminants.
handled.
What's that?
I feel like I say that all the time. Used, stored, manufactured, or
Right.
handled.
Right. It's coming up at, in all site remediation cases, there is a requirement to evaluate for it. And so that is a little bit of a fine line when it comes to your LSRP who's doing that evaluation. whether or not to sample, to do actual sampling for emerging contaminants or not. And it's really no different than the analysis that it goes into, when you're having a preliminary assessment or a site investigation, in that, you're first looking at whether the facility or the site, as Caryn said, use, store, generate, handles, et cetera, the substances. But then after that, you're looking at, your LSRP is looking at multiple lines of evidence. You're not automatically jumping to, we need to sample for it at a site. You're looking at things like the industry sector, NAICS codes. You're looking at, past fires at the property that you might be aware of. You're looking at a lot of other factors to develop those multiple lines of evidences that LSRPs have to do. So because it involves professional judgment, you're going to get different opinions from different LSRPs as to whether you need to make that jump to take a sample in your evaluation for emerging contaminants. So that's where we're finding it becomes tricky at sites that are currently undergoing remediation, where you may think, well, this isn't a site that's gonna encounter any emerging contaminants or PFAS issues, but you have to do that evaluation. You have to document your multiple lines of evidence as an LSRP. It has to be in your remedial action report or your milestone report. And I think there are multiple steps you can take to, I don't want to say avoid sampling, but to demonstrate that the sampling is not necessary. Because if you do have to sample, particularly for groundwater, there's a high likelihood you're going to find it in some respects.
The sites that I'm working on follow some of these things. Maybe it's an old ISRA site now you've evaluated for PFAS. You can evaluate that on a separate timeline, which is good. You can follow that. But it adds a lot of length to your ISRA investigation. You just elongated by who knows how long. The thing that I'm finding, once you do sample, and maybe you guys see that too, low levels of PFAS kind of pervasively, 12 parts per trillion, 20 parts per trillion, maybe as high as 25 or 30. And as an LSRP, I'm like, am I going to do an active remediation for a couple of parts per trillion over the standard? And I think more broadly, is there enough carbon in the state? Is there enough resources to get to that? The flip side of that is we all know that these compounds don't degrade. Can we do a monitored natural attenuation? And one of the things we talk about in the PFAS group is, can you really do M&A for non-degrading compounds? The department doesn't particularly like unending CEAs, indeterminate CEAs. These kind of concentrations can fall into that. So as Rayna and Caryn were both saying, I think we collectively have to work together to find out viable solutions, economic solutions that are also protective, because trying to get a few tens of parts per trillions down to single parts per trillions is going to be very difficult. So, David, I'll go ahead and let you speak now on PFAS. You can just say everything we said is correct and move on.
I was making sure that the microphone is dropped from 3 bars. It was down to 1 bar. It's back up to 2. I was hoping it was at 0, and then I would just shout. But PFAS is a pain. It's difficult. The numbers are very low. Again, they're based on the science. The reason we worked the way we did in terms of going from the water side to the soil side is we had to wait until there were acceptable tox factors that were allowed to be used. Those came out through DeWicki and EPA and the water program. We're doing the same with the new EPA numbers that came out a month or so ago, that we're waiting on water. New Jersey is a primacy state. We're waiting for the MCLs to be adopted, and the way I word it, it's just a domino and piggyback. That from the MCL, the groundwater quality criteria will change. From the groundwater quality criteria changing, the groundwater remediation standards will change, and then we'll also do the soil standards at the same time. We are still moving forward. We have posted interim soil remediation standards for a bunch of the PFAS out there, 4 or 5 of them. We're still moving forward. We're doing a rulemaking on that. We will have those numbers out there. We don't know what's going to happen if EPA is going to be sued. We don't know if those numbers are absolutely going to go through. We have usable tox factors, so we are going to keep moving forward on that rule proposal for the soil. Again, we're hoping that comes out sometime by the end of summer.
If you were a betting man, would you think that the 13, 14 parts per trillion groundwater standards are going to go down to EPA's 4?
If nothing happens on the EPA side, absolutely, we will. They're already working on it. There's the 2-year phase-in. I don't know if that's the right term. There's the 2-year phase-in in terms of what the public water suppliers need to do. But again, we have up to 2 years to get a rule out there adopted, and that will have the new MCLs in it.
Any update on the state study?
The state study is still, I believe all the sampling is done, all the analyses are complete, they're undergoing QA/QC. There's a handful that still need to get done. I was supposed to memorize my notes. There's 2 different parts to the study, what we're trying to document. Don't ask me which is which unless you want me to take 5 minutes going through my notes, but one part we're hoping to have out late fall, early winter of this year. The second part will be coming out sometime late winter, early spring of 25.
If anybody needs some information on what the study is, you can talk to David or I afterwards, and we'll go with that. So, all right, I'm going to take, unless you have one more PFAS comment to close us
Yes.
up?
Well, just the following up and just listening and about, PFAS, I think what we need to do is we have tools, how to identify chemicals. And it would be good to take away the hysterical about PFAS and try to work through the existing process. Like you were talking to Caryn about, a property, you're going to be looking at what contaminant concerns. You're going to go through a due diligence and figure it out. And we need to do the same thing with the PFAS, which we are doing. And then with the standards, we're doing the same thing. I mean, it's been the last several years, there's been new standards. We need to address those standards.
A new methodology to go with
and the
it.
methodology, and that has been shifting and everything. But I think if we can use the tools that we are given for these chemicals and put away the hysteric about, oh my gosh, this is PFAS on this property, but try to work through the process and work with the regulator and, work collectively. The other thing is, PFAS, when we say it, it's so broad. It is broad across the spectrum, but what PFAS are you really looking for? The water soluble, the soil, and the gas. So it just put it in perspective of what the rules we have. And just a comment about, modern natural attenuation. Degradation is one part of an M&A, and that there's other physical characteristics. And I just want to share with you the Department of Defense Environmental Security Technology Certification Program. They are working on right now a PFAS monitored retention and enhancement retention. And I went to a PFAS symposium last month, and this is coming from Department of Defense. It's a study, and the report will be out this summer. But David, it talks about the processes, about all of the M&A and the retention. So just want to plant the seed that there are a possibility, and collectively we just talk about it. It's just an opportunity. There's a lot of research that's going on the federal level, a lot of research going on at the universities. But if we can kind of just talk and pull, because there is going to be a technology that's going to come out. It's just a matter of time. We just got to work through the process, and we need to get through the interims like we did with hydrocarbons, with chlorinated solvents. So
We're all learning on the fly here.
yeah,
as we
we're
go
all
through.
learning. We're moving forward. And then that's just what I wanted to say in closing, but thank you for the opportunity to speak about it. Thank you.
Just to, darn it, there it goes again. I had 2 points to make, and I'm only remembering one of them. We treat PFAS like any other chemical. The big difference is that the standards are so low. But otherwise, if there's a concern that PFAS is on the site, we tell you to look for it. If there's no concern that PFAS is on the site, document that fact, and we just move on. To the second point.
That sounds so simple, but actually walking through that is very hard.
I don't deny it. It's easy for me to say that part. The devil is in the details for the folks doing the work. I do recognize that. I know that I'm being recorded here, and my words will come back to damn me at some point, but, and I really probably shouldn't say this, but I will say that Department of Defense has probably been our single most difficult client to work with when it comes to PFAS. So, of all the people who do a study.
Well,
But
it's
I
jointly with a GSI, so.
But I think there is some hope we can get to something that
Absolutely.
might look like monitored natural attenuation
Yes.
if it's not called that. I think we all recognize, again, the
We do
resources.
need to figure
state-
something out.
Yeah.
And we worked through this, back in the days when we had our Bureau of Underground Storage tanks, and you had benzene at 3 parts per billion.
Holy
And then it
cow,
would drop
remember when
down,
that was
and then it
like.
would go up, and then it would drop down. And what did we do with those situations? We need to think outside the box and come up with a similar solution for when PFAS is minimally above the standard.
All right. Caryn, you good? Okay. I'm going to close with hopefully what's an easier one. The groundwater quality standards are being promulgated. There's a whole lot of new numbers. There are 65 constituents that are changing. 50 are becoming more stringent. But hey, there's 13 that are less stringent, so that's good. And 2 interim criteria that are becoming the specific criteria. There's 7 with order of magnitude changes. At least in my mind, vinyl chloride is probably the most concerning of those. We find that frequently. Some thoughts about what this might do? Is it just business as usual? We're used to it? Or, Rayna, I'm looking at you. What do you think?
Sam, I would say that was our winter project that we put together, those comments. Industry did, we hired Integral to help us with those comments. Really, some of the themes that we saw is really the inconsistency of the hierarchy of the tox data. And what I mean by that is that we just came through remediation standards, and they used all the tox data. And now we're going through the groundwater. And wouldn't you think you'd use the same tox data because it's a reference dose or a cancer slope for the chemicals? And what we did find in the analysis, and it's in our comments, there are differences with remediation standards, the soil versus your groundwater. And it kind of gets tricky because you got the groundwater standards, which you back calculate into your migration to groundwater, which eventually those remediation standards are going to get reopened after the groundwater standards become final. So there's just a little bit of a disconnect with the tox data. So we pointed that out to review. It wasn't quite clear and explained in the basis and background document. That's one point. The second point, and I know that we always do this, but Massachusetts and Connecticut basically have the same risk level as us. And there are definitely differences in our groundwater standard stat versus Massachusetts, who just recently adopted in March. So we did some comparison in tables, just looking at from their risk and exposure versus in New Jersey, which is 110 to the 10⁻⁶. So, just some pointing out those. And yes, it will be difficult to orders of magnitude for vinyl chloride. So, we're going to have to work through the process. It was just the same as 1-dioxane.
1,4-dioxane, yeah.
1,4-dioxane that we had in, what was that, 2016 when you dropped that interim number?
I remember the exact day because it caused me an IEC on that day.
I know, because it was right before an RI that was supposed to be completed. But we just need to really look at the numbers and really the science behind it, and just from a consistency standpoint with the standards of being across, so that we can feel good. And Dave, when we did the analysis, we looked at all the chemicals. It wasn't looking at like, well, which ones went up? We're not gonna worry about them, or the ones down. We looked at across the board and did not even look into like how the numbers were changing, but just really let the science. And I know that you're not responsible for groundwater, but it is all in a nice table and explained, the differences. And we're just looking for an explanation. Because I think we all realize in this room that those numbers are going to stay. And we'll just have to work through the process as we normally do. But there's just some concerns and some questions that need to be answered.
Now, I know
Thank you.
David's not going to be able to respond to your specific comments right here and now, but I'm sure the department's taking a look at it. But David, your thoughts on you don't have to answer the comments that Rayna brought up, but where the process is going?
I'm gonna punt 2 different ways. One, not my rule. But the water folks are looking at that. They're going through the process. And gosh, I just keep doing this today. I did have a second reason I was going to punt. Oh, and because it's during the comment and response period, I'm not allowed to talk about anything. So, but, again, Water Group is looking at those comments. I am sure that they will be in touch with my soil remediation group to understand where we set up our hierarchy, if and how it is different from the water hierarchy for the TOPS factors.
To me, there was a couple other interesting things in the proposal. Not only did they adjust the amount of water being taken in and your body weight, I guess we're drinking more but getting fatter, so it was changed a little bit. But also worked in there was anytime you have a MCL, it can become a groundwater standard by default. And then secondly, that dreaded rounding factor that we spoke of earlier. I don't want to say it's nice because you're now at 2 decimal points. I like the ability to round up, but at least it's consistent from a rounding point of view. So.
And that was a lot of it. Was we had an MCL of 1, but then we had an MCL of 1.5, but then we had a groundwater standard of 1.
Yep.
I know for myself in site remediation, that was a big problem. So that was part of it. All of our standards were 2 significant digits, and we were able to push the water program to whichever one you want to go with is fine. Pick one and stick with it.
Yeah, gotcha.
So they are moving all of their standards as they change to the 2 significant digits.
So Caryn, I'll give you the last word on this one. How does this affect your clients and moving forward and closing cases?
Yeah, I think the order of magnitude changes are always the one that grab everyone's attention and garner the most chatter. But some of them, some of the garden variety contaminants like benzene and ethylbenzene that tend to crop up at a lot of sites, those are changing, not by order of magnitude, but certainly ones that our clients are looking at. And they need to make a decision if they're pre-RAO about whether they want, whether they want to submit a work plan to try to lock in a lower standard, or whether they want to just plow forward and hope they can get their report in before the phase-in period ends. So those 2, I would say, are constituents that are come up at a lot of sites that you don't necessarily have to do that order of magnitude evaluation, but that the standard being lowered, it's still a consideration when you're going for a permit under a natural attenuation remedy.
Excellent. So that kind of wraps up where.
I just want to follow on that.
He remembered
I
a
believe
second
specific to benzene, it was actually a rounding issue. I think it's going down to 0.9 or something like that, and I
I
believe
think it's 0.45.
Yeah.
0.45. Okay. So it's not a rounding issue. I take that back.
No, it's not.
But folks, and I always try to give a primer whenever order of magnitude comes up that there's different provisions in the Brownfield Act that we work this through. If you do not have an RAO yet, if you have a remedial action work plan approved by the department or certified by your LSRP, you're locked in at that point, as long as there isn't an order of magnitude change. So going from 1 to 0.45 is not an order of magnitude. You have what you have. If you're post-RAO, you're in a long-term monitoring with a permit, same deal. The second part of it is, it's also based on what remains at the site.
Yes. So many people
So
forget
when something changes by an order of magnitude, and I always try to do the math in my head and screw it up, but the current standard is 70. It drops to 5. So that's an order of magnitude change. If you left behind 60, that is more than an order of magnitude. You need to do something to ensure protectiveness. If you left behind 40, you're fine. You do that in your biennial certification. You'll let us know. I went through the order of magnitude process. Here's the math. I remain protective based on the statute. So, I'm not saying order of magnitude isn't scary, but again, take it all the way through the process to make sure, does it truly apply to my site? I did run numbers for this one, and I found my page. Specific to vinyl chloride, there are 252 active cases that would be affected by this order of magnitude. That is 5% of the vinyl chloride cases. For closed cases, it's 134, and that is only 2% of the closed cases. And for cases that have a raw in-house, it comes down to 6%. But that 252 and the 134, from the DEP's perspective, don't forget, we're looking at all of our universe. So that's over 40,000 cases that we're looking at. So it's not
It may
even
seem like a small number to you, but those of us that have the
Understood,
case,
but
it's
again,
very important.
we're looking at it from that health perspective, from the protectiveness perspective. For the folks that are impacted, it's a big deal. I get that. But we're also looking at it that 99% of our cases are not impacted. That is part of our calculus.
Ray, can I open up to a question or two? One question. You have a bunch of smart people up here. Can we take a question or two? Or one, as Ray says?
Hold on.
I'll beat you.
I didn't know it was a race. She did beat me.
This is sort of unrelated to the topics discussed. On our sites, Dave, we are dealing with that one well with Sheen and just something that shows up. And we haven't seen the department being considerate of natural source zone depletion sort of concepts. Any thoughts on where the department might go in those kind of situations?
So for better or worse, you're talking to the person who is the impediment.
That's why I'm asking the question of you.
I'll be straight up and honest. My job is to make sure that groundwater gets cleaned up, that it's restored and maintained and enhanced. That's our go-to from the statute. That's our mandate from the statute. I have always looked at it that if product is present, you will be constantly feeding as a source to the dissolved groundwater phase. We'll never get rid of that dissolved phase. We're allowed to go through M&A, we're allowed to let the plume stick around for a while, but if we know that there's a source and the plume will be sticking around for even longer, I think it's incumbent on us as environmentalists to try and get that product out and get the groundwater cleaned up sooner, not later. The flip side of all of this is NRD. The longer that plume is out there, the bigger the whack will be when you talk to Office of Natural Resource Restoration and try to come up with an NRD settlement.
All right, George, got to be quick. We're over time.
David,
I was told one question, so I've reached my limit.
this is the question. George Berkowitz, Continuing Professional Education Services. First of all, you know that being an assistant commissioner, you need to be a punching bag, and then you give as much as you take. And first of all, we want to thank you for re-engineering the permitting program. We came to you, you listened, and you did it. But re-educating, re-improving the program is a continuum. It doesn't stop ever. And I would ask you, use the word professional. In most professions, there are continuing education requirements. A dentist, a veterinarian, an MD, even lawyers, even lawyers. So my question to you, are you comfortable with the educational requirements, the technical expertise that exists in your staff, and does it become stagnant or does it change, and can you mandate that change?
I am absolutely confident in the competency of my staff. It's not directed at you, but I find it insulting when people question that. They are all educated, they all have college degrees, most of them have some background in one of the sciences, whether we have our professional geologists, not that they're registered PGs, we have folks that have taken chemistry, biology, environmental science classes. We have an educated staff. Please don't try to convince me ever that it's otherwise. Yes, we do training. We try to keep them up to date. We're all very busy. I know, I don't know if any of you are aware of this, my wife works for the board staff, so every now and then I get to hear some gripes about how there's a crush to get their education credits done on the LSRP side. Everybody's busy. It is difficult to keep up. The science for environmental remediation is always moving forward. It is not in and of itself stagnant. We do what we can to get our staff trained up. We offer it in-house. Whenever we do any kind of guidance training or one of our roundtables with LSRPs and other stakeholders, staff are obviously invited, especially when it's done through teams. Are we 100% perfect at it? No, we're not. But I would argue that it's impossible for anybody to be fully educated on what needs to be known out there.
I'd like to close with saying thank you. It's been a very cooperative and collaborative effort. We appreciate the chance to communicate in the work groups as well as venues like this. And thank you guys all for your time.